I'm not much of an actor, but I am a history buff, and I'm excited today to tell you a story about my grandfather, Oliver Sherman Warden, who also went by OS. OS was the publisher of the Great Falls Tribune when Great Falls grew into Montana's largest city, and the Tribune went from being a pretty small town newspaper to being one of the largest media operations in the state. Born in 1865 in North Haverhill, New Hampshire, OS came to Great Falls after graduating from Dartmouth College. At Dartmouth College, he met H.P. Rolfe, who was the original surveyor for the town site of Great Falls, a friend of Paris Gibson's, and a fantastic salesperson. Rolfe filled OS's heads with stories of boundless opportunities, prosperous fields, lush rivers, wide forests. OS was so excited that when Rolfe offered him a job working at Rolfe's newspaper, the Great Falls Leader, he jumped at the chance. He wanted to be part of what Rolfe called building the biggest city in the West. Once in Great Falls, OS met Colonel William Bowles, a seasoned fellow newspaperman at the Leader, who became his mentor, his business partner, and a lifelong friend. 5 years after joining the Leader, OS and Bowles bought the struggling Great Falls Tribune from the founder, Will Hanks. Will Hanks also ran a newspaper in Sun River, and his reluctance to commute back and forth, and also his poor prediction that Great Falls would never be bigger than Sun River, ended up becoming their golden opportunity. In 5 years, they transformed the Tribune into the city's leading newspaper. Things looked limitless for this intrepid duo until William Clark, the Copper King, posed their first dire business challenge. Clark, who was the owner of the Anaconda Copper Company, planned to run for the U.S. Senate, and he was eyeing the Tribune, along with other local papers that he didn't already own, as assets necessary to bolster his political ambitions. So he issued them an ultimatum: sell him the Tribune or he would drive them out of business with a rival that he would self-fund. To everyone's surprise, OS and Bowles agreed to the decision, but they did it with a caveat. They retained the right of first refusal to buy back the Tribune, betting that Clark's interests over time would fade. And their foresight paid off. After Clark's victory, his interest did wane, and OS and Bowles repurchased the Tribune. In 1927, Bowles retired, and OS became the principal owner and publisher, a role that he held for 25 years. During that period, the Tribune grew to be the largest newspaper, not only in Great Falls, but in Montana, and one of the most trusted. And the reason is it was one of the only newspapers in the state not to be owned by the Anaconda Copper Company. To give you an idea of how dominant it was, of the 56 counties in Montana, it outsold the local competition in 50 of them, and it was sold in every single county in Montana. In 1922, Warden expanded into broadcast journalism, founding Montana's first radio station, KFBB, which turned into the KFBB we know and love today. And it broadcast out of the Tribune building and could be heard as far as Los Angeles. He was a political character as well, in that he also became a champion for building out the West. I think the West that Rolfe promised him wasn't quite the one that he met when he got out here, but he felt that if we could harness some of the resources around us, we really could turn the prairies into those lush fields of gold that he had been promised. And so in 1924, he kind of dipped his toes into public service. He joined the Montana Highway Commission, and he became the leading proponent for building Highway 200, which goes from here to Missoula. And he felt very strongly about it because Great Falls needed a connection to the Pacific Northwest, and namely Spokane, which was booming at that time. He faced really strong opposition, and most people didn't think it would ever get done because Helena was the most powerful town in the city, and they wanted us all to drive through Helena to get there, as you can imagine. His determination paid off, and Highway 200 was indeed built. Over the next 30 years, well into his 70s and 80s, he worked tirelessly to not only build out Montana's infrastructure, but also the country's. Senator Mansfield, who became a close friend, described it as a one-man mission to, quote, get Montana out of the mud. He envisioned a state that could harness its resources and become a powerhouse for not only the western U.S., but the world. His work in Montana, particularly his guts to take on the political establishment, gained him some national recognition and some new friends. In the 1930s and 40s, President Roosevelt and Truman appointed him to be the longest chair of the National Reclamation Association. It was one of the most, it still exists today, but back in its time, it was one of the most powerful federal commissions, as it directed federal money into infrastructure projects to build out the western United States. During this time, he also served on the board of the Associated Press, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and was the president of the U.S. Commission on Highways. In Montana, some of the contributions that he helped bring to the state was the building of the Canyon Ferry Reservoir System, the creation of Fort Peck Dam, the Milk River Complex, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's really integral to the Golden Triangle, and Great Falls is a water supply. Hungry Horse Dam, and going to the Sun Highway. Nationally, he played a key role in the development of Grand Coulee and Hoover Dams, and was one of the founders of the Bonneville Power Administration. In his final years, he focused on improving the U.S. highway system, and was passed away 7 months after the congressional approval of the federal highway system on February 1st, 1957. My dad told me he was really happy to pass away knowing that Congress had approved that. OS helped build many great things, but what I find most inspiring about him and what I want to share today is what he chose not to build. A prominent Montana author that I know pretty well wrote a book 20 years ago crediting OS with making the biggest business blunder in the history of Montana. And he says that this happened when OS refused to buy the Anaconda Copper Company newspapers, which were offered to him in an exclusive deal. It would have brought not only the Tribune, which was the largest paper at the time, but also the newspapers in Helena, Butte, Billings, Missoula, and Anaconda under the control of the Tribune. And OS is reportedly, he declined the offer, and he said at the time, "We've all learned through history, and I've learned through my personal experience, that no one person should have so much power. Montana is better served by an independent and free press." And just think about that for a moment. How many people would pass that up? While OS will be best remembered for his accomplishments in journalism, I think his real legacy also lies in the engineering feats that he championed. These have transformed Montana, and they still provide a lot of the power and resources that we use today to thrive. Upon his death, his friend and prominent local architect George H. Shanley said, "OS's achievement and devotion to Great Falls, Montana, and the nation are well known. His name, like the mountains, the sea, and the stars, endures timelessly. And as long as the United States of America stands, OS Warden will be remembered with love and affection." There's a saying that we all stand on the shoulder of giants. And I'm proud my grandfather was one of those giants, both for what he chose to do and what he chose not to do. You know, in our current time of political divide, where some seek to dismantle the achievements of history or to consolidate the power of the press for personal or political purposes, I think OS's story offers a really valuable lesson for us today. And integrity and determination and just service to the good of the people. And I'm really grateful to share it with you today. Thanks for listening. OS is buried or interred in this mausoleum behind me with my grandmother and OS's first wife, my father, Jock Finley Warden. Some of you might have known. There's familiar faces in the crowd. My dad worked at the Tribune for a long time, but he also operated the Jack Club restaurant. And yes, I do have recipes for the sauce, ravs, and salad dressing. You're welcome to step in and look around if you want to. And I just thank you for being here today. Norma also asked me to share something earlier that I'd like to share with the group. I was born and raised in Great Falls. I spent 15 years working in Silicon Valley, and then my wife, who is also from Montana, we've been living in Missoula the last 25 years. I've been working for Dennis Washington in his different businesses. And the two of us are going to be returning to Great Falls. I'm going to be your new executive director of the C.M. Russell Museum, something that I'm very proud of. And you're going to see Charlie and Nancy today, so I'm excited for you to see them. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your tour.